All right, it's great to be back. My name is Trevor William Viloria, and welcome to this week's episode of Wednesdays with Wow. This week, I will be talking about standing out, basically, how to be original. How important is originality in spoken word? Well, when I first started, it wasn't really that important because there were very, very few prolific spoken word poets. In fact, just being a spoken word poet was enough to make you stand out. But now, obviously, with all of this mainstream saturation, spoken word is essentially everywhere. Originality, in my opinion, has nothing to do with avoiding certain topics. It's easy to say, oh no, I'm not gonna write a poem about love or heartbreak, no more hugot, and stuff like that. Because there are so many people who do that already. Your originality is defined by what you hate. In my opinion, that's not how to approach the problem of, how do I get noticed? How do I make myself unique compared to the other poets? For me, the easiest way to set yourself apart is through form. I've already talked about form extensively before in a different episode of Wednesdays with Why. You can click right here to watch that episode. As far as I know, a lot of the really fresh and green poets, they all sound kind of samey. They all try to imitate a certain style. If you're one of those younger poets, the easiest way would be to not to avoid certain topics, but to have a form that is unique to yourself, a certain writing style, if you will. I don't just play with form, I also play with the concept of the stage persona. Because the stage persona is not a character that you invent. The stage persona is still you. It's still you. So you're not pretending to be someone else on stage. The stage persona is you, except distilled, more like a more dramatic and poetic version of yourself. Okay, fine. Having a stage persona is a little out there. It's a little weird. You want something not as radical. Fine. Well, what you can do is have a certain stage presence about you that is again unique to yourself. Not everyone can have the kind of affect that I and someone like Juan Miguel Severo has. Not everyone can have the soft and sultry vibe of Michelle Manese, and not everyone can have the hypnotic effect of, say, Louis Meets, for example. What you need to do is you need to have your own vibe. It's a little harder to quantify, and I hate non-quantifiable things since I'm a man of science. This is the only kind of thing that comes out when you practice. And not practice like at home, when you practice on stage. When you've performed dozens and dozens of times, your stage persona, your stage presence naturally develops or rather comes out the more you perform, since you gain more confidence, right? Some people, like me for example, and the rest of Words Anonymous, we have a uniform. Yeah, we do. If you notice, a lot of us wear black during our bigger gigs. And for me, I take it a step further. I wear a hoodie all the time, a black hoodie. So that's kind of my uniform, so that I have a distinct image in people's heads. Fat guy in black hoodie, long hair. Well, not so long anymore. But, you get the idea. So that I immediately look distinct from the other poets. Not just through my pieces and my voice and my intonation, but also through the way I literally present myself. Another question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to be timely or timeless? A lot of poets would choose one over the other, but I think they're both equally viable. It's a question between timeliness versus timelessness. Disposable versus versatile. Topical versus detached, and political versus personal. Because I believe that versatile pieces, ones that can be relevant at any point in time, ones that are detached and are quite personal. I find that these pieces are generally more original, and they last longer because they're relevant for longer periods of time. These are the kinds of pieces that I write, or rather, I want to write. I don't like writing pieces that are only relevant now. For example, there's a certain social issue that I want to tackle, so I'll write about it, but then next year it won't be relevant anymore. I'm not saying that being a topical poet is detrimental to being original. Of course you can be original. You can the way you can be timely and original is if you tackle certain issues that are not being talked about. Then again, you have to write a lot if you want to be that kind of poet. You need to always look for things that you're passionate about, certain topics that you need to talk about, so that people will pay attention to them. For me personally, I am not a political poet. I'm more of a storyteller and a personal poet, because I think when you make things very, very subjective, they become less prone to obsolescence, so to speak. But then you cannot be a distinct writer overnight. You can't just sit down on your desk and then say, I'm going to write something completely original, and then be successful. Unless, of course, you're a genius. If you're just an ordinary writer who's just going through the motions like I am, it takes time. It takes a lot of time for you to distinguish yourself completely from the rest. I call it the Beatles effect. Because for those of you who follow my pieces, you'll notice that a lot of my earlier pieces, they're about love and heartbreak and whatnot. But then again, they're personal. These are about experiences that I've had, and nothing I do will ever change what happened to me in the past. So when I perform them now, they're still relevant. But here's the thing: the Beatles, when they started out, they wrote a lot of love songs, and that's how they became popular. And I'll admit, I wrote a lot of pieces about heartbreak, not because they were popular. That kind of piece was just popular at the time, so I was just in the right place at the right time, and I was just writing I was just writing the right kind of piece to garner some attention. But then, when I finally got people to pay attention to me in my pieces, that's when I started experimenting. At the height of Beatlemania, the Beatles started becoming more reclusive, and they started to experiment more. So I think as an artist, you could do what the Beatles did, and you could start writing all the who good stuff first, or you could start writing very, very political and topical things first. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you want to set yourself apart, eventually you'll have to realize that even your own preferences change. You may write a lot of very, very angry pieces, or very, very sweet, or very, very bitter pieces, but then you'll get sick of them. You will get sick of your own pieces the more people ask you to, hey, can you do that piece? Hey, can you do that piece? This is why I no longer like doing simile and list and all of those older poems, because even though I love those pieces like I would my own children, I want to experiment more, because I like new things, and I like testing myself to see how far I can take the craft in terms of being creative. So I think you can do the same thing, because again, I'm taking the Beatles example. After you do all of your, I Want to Hold Your Hand, all of your poppy poems, you could start, experimenting like the Beatles did with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And like me with, I started slow. I started with, not so experimental pieces like, the Baymax poem, which is an exercise on parallelism, but in the end, it was still a little, it was still about heartbreak, but I could kind of, see myself, hey, I like experimenting. This is really exciting. And then later on, I no longer cared what I wrote about. If it was, if it involved heartbreak or politics, I no longer cared, because to me, form is everything now. It's now more about how effective can I send a certain message. It could be a stupid message For example, my one of my newer pieces was about my old apartment. It's really dumb, but then I loved experimenting with it, and I love that really, really light message that I managed to send through the piece. I experimented with more personal things, with more personal topics, like when I wrote Zero, which was about the fear of being left behind, not just in love, but in life as well. I wrote about very controversial things, like in my, like in certain pieces, like in Help Me and The Echo. I talk about, very, very sensitive topics like suicide in Instructions. See, in the end, if you push yourself to, find new ways of setting yourself and your pieces apart, not only from the others, but from one another, then what you write about won't be relevant. Because, you could be a poet who writes about love exclusively. But then if you set each piece apart, because that's the best thing about being original, each of your pieces are distinguishable and unique from one another, even if they're all about the same thing. This is why I take so long to write, because I don't want, one piece to resemble another. I mean, no offense to some of the other poets out there, but there are some poets out there who I notice that they have certain pieces that I'm like, wasn't your other piece kind of like that? And I confuse one piece with the other, and it's embarrassing because really they sound the same. I mean, you get what I mean? It has very little to do with what the subject matter is. I mean, you can, talk about love and heartbreak and all that hugot crap until you get sick of it. It's fine, but if you really want to set yourself apart, you don't have to suddenly talk about something you don't want to. I mean, if you're a love poet, sure, go ahead. You don't have to force yourself to become a political poet just because, it's no longer cool to be, a huguti poet. Just, play around with the form. Just be yourself, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It sounds so trite, but that if you internalize the fact that no matter what happens, you are distinct from every other poet you know. If you internalize that and accept all of the ideas that come into your head and never, ever think any idea is a bad idea, then being original, so to speak, will come naturally to you. But then again, I'm speaking from experience, a lot of experience, and I often forget how long it takes. See, of course, being original, okay, if I may leave you with one final message, it would be that being original is nothing if you don't practice. You can't have broken English or Filipino and expect, a gimmick to go over. You need to know the basics. You need to know proper spelling and grammar. You need to know the basics of form. You need to know the basics of conveying a message. All right? You need to have skills in conveyance and theming, with similes and metaphors and wordplay. Because if you don't start with that, and then you may stand out, but you're not outstanding. Diba? Ika nga ni Balaki, hindi porket standing out ka, outstanding ka na rin. You can't force yourself to be original on day one. It takes time. And there is nothing wrong with writing about what you like. You don't have to, bend over backwards and write about something other people want you to write about. Don't. Because originality has nothing to do with the topics. Although you can be original and write something about, hot sauce. Because one of the most original poems I've ever seen is about sriracha. And yeah, you could do that if you want. You can write about something really, really surreal or weird. Go ahead. That's a more direct way of being original. But, if you want to be a little more subtle about it, yeah, play with form, basically. Play with the words and make each piece distinct. And when you perform your pieces, make your performances unique. Make your stage presence, unique from everybody else's. Have your own vibe, so that it's not just your pieces that are original. It's also the way you perform them. Okay, I will leave you with that, and good luck with your writing, everybody. My name is Trevor Viloria, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.